Week 4 of the House of Commons winter sitting saw MPs tabling a lot of documents. Justice Minister Arif Virani presented long-awaited legislation addressing online harms. Health Minister Mark Holland and NDP health critic Don Davies stood side by side unveiling the National Pharmacare Plan. Plus, the government faced questions over documents it tabled about a case of suspected Chinese espionage at Canada's top infectious disease lab. But parliamentary business quickly came to a halt last night when the country learned that former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney had passed away, uniting the country in moments of reflection about one of Canada's most successful political leaders. Time to bring in our panel of party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. And Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. All right, gang, we're going to talk about Brian Mulroney at the end, but as you saw there was a lot this week that we want to touch on before we get to that. So, Greg, let's start. You wanted to highlight the online harms legislation, which the government has finally tabled on Monday, which seems a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it was a very, very long week. Second attempt. This time they got it right. I think, I don't want to talk too much about process or to be, inelegant, the sausage making, but it was well received. You had, for example, the Facebook whistleblower saying probably one of the best pieces of legislation around this that you've seen. They had some really poignant stories from families who have been affected very negatively by online harassment. It was tough going sometimes to watch what they did. I think the government got it right. We were talking not that long ago about how the Conservative leader said that, sight unseen was going to be against it. The Conservatives were very quiet on it this week, didn't raise it in question period. We'll see if that lasts. But I think it's an important piece of legislation. It affects a lot of people. There still has, debate will be helpful on this because this is brand new areas, but there's things in that bill that other countries have done and done well. So I think it was a piece of legislation that has landed well.
Yeah, Mel, there's still some questions about the criminal justice component of it and how the regulations are going to work and how these new commissioners are going to function. But Arif Virani rolled it out, I thought, effectively on Monday in a way we haven't seen cabinet ministers rolling out their policies in a while.
Totally. It was thoughtful, and there seemed to be support ready to come out when the bill did come out. Obviously, the last time they tried to do something similar right away, it was almost like they hadn't considered what the blind spots were, and right away they kind of were attacked from all angles. Whereas this time, I think that there's still people saying, well, what about this? What about this? But it's more like, well, what if it's a joke? Then am I going to get in trouble? And it's like, if that's really the only thing that we're worried about here, they're on a better path. So I think long overdue, and they did. I think they did well this week. I think with that, they rolled it out properly. And to your point, it was hard for people to come out and criticize it openly. So we'll see what happens with it. But I thought that was done properly.
Fred, it's interesting. It's moved from a heritage bill to a justice bill, which is probably where it really belongs for this sort of a thing. And to Greg's point, the pre-action from the opposition, I did a Control F. There's no mention of Anne Frank. That sort of stuff is not going to be captured by this. What do you think of the way it evolved and sort of the political opposition to it got very quiet, it seemed?
Well, I think it goes to show you the value of having an actual communications plan, which the Liberals put into this for the first time. I think we've seen anything like that in a long time, and it's paid off, and that's why we're having this conversation now, that they actually seem to have gotten something out there with actually stakeholders supporting it. And of course, the opposition is going to oppose. There is some parts of the bill that the Conservatives won't be in favor of, all of the creation of the new commissioners, that sort of thing, when there's maybe just toughen up the current laws. But we're going to be examining this as well as this unfolds. But, to Greg's point about how it wasn't raised a lot in the House, a big part of that, of course, was there were so many other things to raise in the House.
Yeah, see, there is that. And look, and I'm curious to know how these commissioners are going to work, right? Because, when you create something like this, it's got to be done right. But I don't know how you deal with something, Greg, just as a final point, like as immediate as online harms without some sort of like law enforcement, yes, but that's kind of after the fact. Like you see it, it's got to be stopped. The police can't be at that. You need some other way to do it, right?
Yeah, we've kind of have this expectation that legislation is supposed to be perfect and arrives absolutely perfect, which defeats the reason for Parliament. There has been lots of times where bills are improved. That is the point of Parliament, especially in an area like this that is, it's tough going territory. As I mentioned, there are other countries that have done this, but they have not been 100% successful either. So Canada gets the opportunity to look at some of the things that they've used and put them in this and see if they're going to work here as well.
I think is adorable. You think there's room for complexity and imperfection in politics. It's the way it's being played in 2024. All right, Mel, let's get to your issue. You wanted to highlight what some people call anti-scab laws, but anti-replacement worker legislation.
Totally. So this week we got to see the vote in the House of Commons, and it was a unanimous vote, meaning all parties supported the bill. I think this is something that, you saw New Democrats out there celebrating with unions. You saw Liberals also. Conservatives were a little bit less, but in the last, I think, 10 years or something, the amount of times that the NDP has put this forward was, I can't even tell you, it's been a lot. So for them to see this pass, I think is really good. And to Minister O'Regan's credit, I think he also gave credit to the NDP and has, welcomed Alexandre Boulris at some of his press conferences and whatnot on this. So that's a win. What I'm going to be paying attention to, and I think what New Democrats and unions are also going to be paying attention to, is what happens at committee. Obviously, the Conservatives supported it to go to committee, but what happens at committee? Do the Conservatives try to weaken it? I've heard kind of in private conversation, oh, don't worry, they support it now, but it's just to go to committee. So in the frame of Pierre Poilievre is going out to workers, he's trying to court unions. How does, your trying to get unions fit for you, trying to get working class to vote for you, match up with your, telling businesses, maybe, we can weaken it at committee. Right. So that interesting context is what I'm going to be paying attention to, and to see where that leads in the next little bit with this legislation. Okay, so Fred, we're going to put you in a tough spot here because you've got a conflict on this you need to declare, and so I want to let you do that, and I want to ask you what you think the Conservatives are doing in terms of voting for it to send it to committee. Is it just to send it to committee, or do you think they're totally on board with this? So tell us your conflict first.
Sure. So full disclosure, I do represent federal regulated employers, so they obviously have an interest in this bill. Right, on the management side. Yeah. Right. In terms of the Conservatives, Greg pointed out very well about how we look at bills and we have to examine them. And I assume that's exactly what Parliament's for. So to steal your lines that you just gave, Greg. You set them off. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I get a footnote, I guess. But this is how Parliament's supposed to work. You look at a bill and you send it to committee, and we're going to see what happens there. There's going to be, I'm sure, if you listen to the speeches from all parliamentarians on this, there's lots from all sides suggesting changes to this bill. And that's, we'll see what happens at committee with that. That'll be the debate that happens. Greg,
did you notice my lips didn't even move?
No, I know.
Time Fred was repeating me. Yeah.
Okay, so you share a byline on that particular bit of analysis, but how do you see this one going? Look, O'Regan was out, they wanted its confidence supply, all of these sorts of things, but how do you think this plays politically as it moves through this legislative process? So politically, I want to go back to the fall of 2022 when Doug Ford threatened the notwithstanding clause. He was in a fight with CUPE, and it backfired. And the Ford government had done really well with unions. They had big endorsements. Private sector unions. Yeah, and Monty McNaughton was the Labour minister at the time. Monty is no longer in provincial politics. There has been continuing problems. Oops, something just fell. All right, we'll figure that out. There's been continuing problems with, Doug Ford's government. I think they learned the hard way the value of what's needed in terms of labour relations. So I'm not surprised that the Conservatives at this point are going slow and have decided to support it at least at this level, because I think that experience with Doug Ford woke up a lot of unions, and they, kind of flexed their power. Okay. All right, Fred, we want to get to your pick. This is sort of the big red meat one for the Conservatives this week, and this is all the documents we got from the Winnipeg lab case. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, my issue with this whole thing was how long it took for us to get this. It was years in the making. Parliament, committees in Parliament itself, all ruled for these documents to be released. The Speaker demanded them to be released. And the government actually took the Speaker to court to fight this, and then called an election, and the whole thing got wiped out anyway. So we're finally seeing it now, and the excuse that we were hearing is that national security reasons why it needed to be kept secret, and it seems to be it was just to save the government and this agency from embarrassment. I think this is a bad look for the Liberals to have been sitting on this for so long, and it's compounded the issue. And again, Parliament has ruled over and over that it should be public, and it's good that it is, and the Conservatives are going to be continuing to comb through this because there's lots there.
Now, Greg, I don't think that was a ventriloquism act from you. Like, he did not get that
No, I
line
don't
from
think
you.
so.
What's your rebuttal there?
I mean, this is a really strange case. I mean, it feels like Jack Ryan got, renewed for a 5th season. When you hear some of the things that have gone on here, there are a lot of head scratchers here. But there was one point where the Conservatives wanted the documents to be released unredacted, and the government, obviously, for security reasons, didn't want that. Judges were to look at them. It took a process. I think there's been some questions about, why the process took so long or why some documents weren't released. I think the problem is when the Conservative leader takes this and he pushes it too far and all of a sudden is talking about how China helped Justin Trudeau win the 2021 election. And that's when everyone starts to go, I think this is a bit odd. I think you're weaponizing this. Everyone needs to kind of catch their breath.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around, Mel. Like, the government's defense yesterday was, we offered to send this NSI cop, and the Conservatives wouldn't do it, the NSI cop. And then we find out in the foreign interference stuff, like, well, NSI cop's been recommending changes to this government for years, and the government isn't listening to what NSI cop, or at least hadn't been listening. So this whole thing, to me, the political stuff aside, Parliament isn't working in a reasonable way when it comes to national security issues, because people are either ignoring or defying the institutions set up to deal with it, right? And then there's the political angle. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we saw in, now that it's out in public, it's obviously deeply troubling, and people obviously have questions about that. But to your point about, well, what was the reasoning for keeping it, not public for so long, and for the process for taking so long? I think that is legitimate criticism. It's we saw a lot of back and forth in the House, and of course there was, side deals about, okay, well, we're going to pass this version of a motion at committee so that this version of the redacted papers get seen or don't get seen. So those are legitimate criticisms. That process took so long. But to your point, when you read it, the angle of national security is I see it, but to the point where the Liberals, took the Speaker to court, made this big this super dramatic thing. All it does is now you're kind of shining a red light or a yellow light or whatever on it, so that people are now focused in on, okay, well, why did the government not want this released? Which I think doesn't help the government, especially as they're trying to push forward other stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, we want to end it there because we do want to get to the Brian Mulroney conversation, and because he's a St. FX guy, right? Mm-hmm. Like Greg and Fred, right? Those connections. So I'm going to let you guys go last. Mel, just your quick thoughts on what on Brian Mulroney when you heard the news yesterday.
For sure, the nice way that people were describing him about how statesman he was, I think we can all agree on, and the kind of politics that we don't really see these days. We oppose each other, we disagreed, but then we went out for a drink afterwards, or we got along afterwards. And when Mr. Mulroney was on your show not that long ago talking about Ed Broadbent after his passing, I think we
called
got
me
to
from the
see,
hospital,
and I think we got to see that kind of statesmanship like from him. So that mark of a good man. So I'll leave that there.
Fred, your thoughts?
It's been obviously very sad to have lost a man of this magnitude, but uplifting at the same time to see all sides embrace him and talk about his legacy in such positive ways. I remember decades ago listening to him give a speech to Conservatives at a leadership convention, and he was talking about how in the future people will look back on the legacy his government left in a very positive way, because they didn't for a while. There's always, when you leave government, there's issues and people will point out things. But today on social media, it was overwhelming. People from the left and the right in Canada coming together and talking about the amazing things and a laundry list of the things that he and his government did. Yeah, political careers rarely have good ends if you stick around for a long time and take some big swings, right? Because you're going to accomplish some things and you're going to make some enemies, and the kind of Greg is central to the Brian Mulroney story, right? Yeah, and he did big ideas. Not all of them worked out, but we're still, we still are living with them. And when the Liberals came in '93, they didn't get rid of the GST. They didn't get rid of the free trade agreement. And then when we had to renegotiate the free trade agreement, he stepped in. But from a personal point of view, all politics is local. And in 1988, my first election, I noticed there was a lot of age confession on the radio one. I fought hard against the free trade deal. I was driving the MP around, or the MP to be. And then in 1999, I went to the St. FX homecoming. My father was class of '59, like Mr. Mulroney. I didn't know if my dad really knew him. And Mulroney came over, and the Liberals in Nova Scotia had just lost. And everybody was heading to the exits, and so I got a better job.
And Mr. Mulrooney asked me what I was doing. I was kind of sheepish, and I told him, and he stopped, and no one else is in the room at that moment when you're talking to Brian Mulrooney. And he told me I'd made the right choice. This was going to be great for my career. This was a huge opportunity. So I went in 11 years from viscerally fighting against this guy to being a puddle as I watched my dad with pride through this conversation. And everything that I've heard about him is that personal touch.
Yeah.
The Winston Churchill, give me my foul weather friends. He was somebody that when you were going through a rough time, he was in your corner.
No, that is definitely something that came through in all the conversations we had yesterday as we did this breaking news event, is that personal connection. Whatever you thought of the public man, the private man was very sincere and cordial and dignified. Right?